What makes you so sure China isn't a military threat to Australia?
Because I've got a brain, principally, and I can think, and I can read, and I read every day, I mean, why would China want a threat? What would be the point? They get the iron ore, the coal, the wheat. What would be the point of China wanting to occupy Sydney and Melbourne militarily? And could they ever do it? I know you're trying to ask a question, but the question is so dumb it's hardly worth an answer. Get this right, Laura. This is about the maintenance of US strategic hegemony in Asia. Now, this is a country which has no land in the metropolitan zone of Asia. There's no part of it. There's no Alaska. There's no islands. There's no US in Asia. It's 10,000 kilometres across the Pacific to the coast of California. So they're not a metropolitan Asian power, but they claim to be and wish to be the primary strategic power in Asia. They're looking around for suckers, global Britain. And they found, here's a bunch of accommodating people in Australia. At the Kabuki show in San Diego a day or so ago, there's 3 leaders standing there. Only one is paying. Our bloke, Elbow.
And secondly, you have a tremendous skill for invective and criticism. Could I ask you now to turn some of that to the Chinese Communist Party and its treatment of Uyghurs, for example, its treatment of pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong? Will you be similarly critical of them as you are of people in your own party and journalists?
After what you co-wrote with Harcher last week in that shocking presentation in the Herald on Monday, Tuesday, and when you should hang your head in shame, I'm surprised you even have the gall to stand up in public and ask such a question, frankly. You want to do the right thing and drum yourself out of Australian journalism, I mean, that's the most egregious, the worst, the most biased presentation. And here you are asking me about Uyghurs, and you're asking me about, if I said to you, and I did say when I saw it last time, here's the Prime Minister over, there's everyone over in India, not one question from any one of you about Modi shutting in the Muslims in Kashmir, in the pro-Hindu policies, nothing.
But there is still a question, Mr. Keating, about the Chinese treatment of the Uyghurs.
Yeah, well, the treatment of the Uyghurs, I'm not to defend China about the Uyghurs. I mean, there's disputes about what the nature of the Chinese affront to the Uyghurs are. There's a dispute about that. But one thing we can't be sure of, what if the Chinese said, but look, what about death in custody of Aboriginal people in your prison system? Wouldn't that be a valid point for them?
What you just saw were clips from a fiery exchange at Australia's National Press Club on March 15th, 2023. The man at the center of it, former Australian Prime Minister Paul Keating, facing a room full of the country's most powerful media journalists. It should have been a serious debate about the nation's future. At the time, the Australian government had just made a historic decision, a nuclear submarine deal with the US and the UK, tying Australia's destiny to the United States more deeply than ever before. However, the very journalists who should have been representing the Australian people, asking tough questions about this massively expensive pact, seemed to be working from a different script, one that served America's strategic agenda almost entirely. Their goal was to take down Keating, the elder statesman who dared to question the US-Australia alliance. They thought it would be an easy kill. They were dead wrong. In the content that follows, you will witness a rare public humiliation. This is not a debate. It is a masterclass in what bad journalism looks like. You will see how one veteran statesman, all by himself, systematically dismantled the bias, ignorance, and hypocrisy of an entire media elite, using nothing more than basic facts and logic. It exposed a deep crisis facing not just Australia, but many Western nations. When the media stopped serving the interests of its own country, who was left to defend them? Let's continue.
The idea that we need American submarines to protect us, 3, if we buy 8, 3 are at sea, 3 are going to protect us from the might of China. Really? I mean, the rubbish of it, the rubbish. And so in other words, let me say this. China has not threatened us, and despite 5 years of this China threat appearing in the Sydney Morning Herald, particularly, written by, provocateurs like Harcher and people, it's all been untrue.
So
untrue.
So if the threat isn't about direct invasion, as you say, there is still an issue about China finding its place in the region and being more assertive in the region. Yeah. What's the appropriate strategic response to that?
Yeah. Well, I say in the speech, but it's worth saying here. China has committed in the eyes of the United States the great sin of internationalism. And what is that sin? To develop an economy as big as the United States. That's the sin. They've got as big as the US. You see, and all those strategic people in the US, they get their little book out and they say, stay as big as us. They're licking through trying to find that, and they can't find it. The Americans will never condone or accept a state as large as them. And that's what China presents. China's mere presence. I mean, they would have preferred they remain in poverty, 20% of humanity forever. But the fact that China is now, an industrial economy larger than the United States, larger, according to IMF, 20% larger, they say, hang on, this is not in the playbook. This is not in the playbook. What an affront. So this is what this is about. It's about the maintenance of US, get this right, Laura, this is about the maintenance of US strategic hegemony in Asia. Now, this is a country which has no land in the metropolitan zone of Asia. There's no part of it. There's no Alaska, there's no islands, there's no US in Asia. It's 10,000 kilometres across the Pacific to the coast of California. So they're not a metropolitan Asian power, but they claim to be and wish to be the primary strategic power in Asia. So what are the Chinese supposed to say to that? Oh, that's okay. We've been here 4,000 years. We've developed, we've been subjugated by every bugger known to man. We've developed a decent economy, a decent standard of living, a shelter, accommodation, education. That's our sin, isn't it? That's our sin.